Metron Garage is a company designing unique garages, condos, and other structures specifically for the auto enthusiast. They've got 8 models to choose from, including 2-story options, which I think is super cool, all with a very modern look and feel to them. And they come in all sizes, and they're fully customizable. You can check out them today and start speccing your own ultimate garage at metrongarage.com, where you can request a catalog or talk to someone to learn more. So be sure to check it out. Hey, it's Greg Stanley. If you're listening to this podcast, you know I love everything automotive. This passion has expanded to include being a car specialist consultant for RM Sothebys. So if you need assistance buying or consigning a collector car at any one of our online or live auctions, including Scottsdale, Amelia Island, or Monterey, you can reach one of our car specialists at rmsotheby's.com, or you can email me directly at gstanley@rmsotheby's.com.
This is the Collector Car Podcast, the home for the auto enthusiast. Join Greg Stanley as he applies over 25 years of insights and analytical experience to the collector car market. He will interview the experts and throw in some fun stuff as well.
Hey, this is Greg Stanley. We have an exciting episode for you here today. It's all about the Cunningham Corvettes. Now, there were 3 of these cars built, and one of them is being auctioned off at RM Sotheby's Amelia Island sale on Saturday, the 22nd. And I will have Corvette expert extraordinaire Kevin McKay give us a little bit of an insight on the Cunningham Corvette. But before I do, I would like to read the history of this car as provided by RM Sotheby's. So this is directly from the auction description that you can find along with the pictures of this iconic and historic car at rmsotheby's.com. So this 1960 Chevrolet Corvette chassis 3535 is a milestone of American motorsport history, as the number 1 car run by American privateer Briggs Cunningham at the 1960 24 Hours of Le Mans, developed with clandestine assistance by General Motors team under Corvette lead Zora Arcos Duntov. It represents a crucial part of Cunningham's final and successful effort to win the world's most challenging race in an American car with American drivers. By the time he was approached by Zora in the fall of 1959, American privateer Briggs Swift Cunningham II, heir to the Procter & Gamble fortune, call out the Cincinnati, and entrepreneur, had all but given up on winning at Le Mans, an understandable conclusion after a decade of effort. Well before the Ford Motor Company trained its sights on Ferrari, achieving a string of triumphs with its GT40 beginning in 1966, Cunningham has set out to conquer the 24-hour race. Such were his patriotic convictions that he took it upon himself to build an American car worthy of Le Mans, entering a pair of Cadillacs in 1950 and cars of his own making from 1951 to 1955, each hand-built in his West Palm Beach, Florida facility. Every year, Cunningham's team drivers were, of course, exclusively American. As a wealthy and well-regarded sportsman, Cunningham enamored French crowds and the American public alike with his ambition, lavish spending, and extremely competitive nature. Yet even as Cunningham triumphed in his other competitive pursuits, winning the 1958 America's Cup race, success at the Circus de la Sarthe eluded him. Meanwhile, a team at GM had been at work developing a competitive spec car aimed at marquee endurance events such as Sebring, Daytona, and the crown jewel, Le Mans. This team was led by Ed Cole and managed by Zora, with vehicle testing completed by some of the most notable American drivers of the time, including Cunningham. However, development was slow. The 1955 Le Mans disaster and changing sentiments about racing accumulated in the Automobile Manufacturers Association racing ban, which prohibited all official American manufacturing racing programs effective June 1st, 1957. By late 1958, competitive undercurrents had surged and development kicked off again, albeit supported by strictly unofficial agreements between manufacturers and privateer race teams. Negotiations with Cunningham completed on January the 7th of 1960, and by January 19th, Duntov's team was already preparing a suite of bespoke racing engines to be dropped into the yet-to-be-acquired cars. On March the 16th, 3 similarly equipped Corvettes were sourced for Cunningham. To disguise Chevrolet's involvement, all chassis were purchased via dealer Don Allen Midtown Chevrolet of New York City. Each chassis was specified with quick ratio steering, heavy-duty metallic brake linings, heavy-duty suspension, a close ratio 4-speed transmission, a posi traction limited slip differential, radio delete, and temperature-controlled radiator fan. The 3 chassis were further modified by Alfred Momo with Stewart Warner gauges, a Hallebrand quick-release fuel cap, Hallebrand magnesium wheels, Firestone racing tires, competition shock absorbers, Bendix fuel pumps, an additional front sway bar, a 37-gallon fuel tank, additional ducting, 2 seats from a Douglas C-47 Skytrain aircraft, and a side exit racing exhaust system. All 3 cars would later receive further modifications after additional testing, including changes to the rear axles, cylinder heads, engine internals, even magnesium hoods were specified, but it is unconfirmed as to whether these were fitted to the trio. Prior to Le Mans, the Cunningham cars benefited from Chevrolet engineering and testing expertise on a strictly unofficial basis, of course, at least in theory, leading to a constant stream of improvements to the chassis. This included pivotal development tests at Sebring and Daytona, at Bridgehampton Race Circuit in Sag Harbor, New York, and in the months leading up to the 24-hour race. Unfortunately, the 12 hours of Sebring did not bode well for the team. Just 27 laps into the race, the number 1 Corvette suffered a rear hub failure and was catapulted end over end, suffering major damage. Thankfully, driver John Fitch escaped with only minor injuries. Some 14 laps later, the number 2 Corvette, driven by Fred Windridge, experienced an engine failure, forcing another early retirement. Undeterred by their disappointing outing at Sebring, the Cunningham team set to repairing the damage to chassis 2538 and outfitting the 2 other cars with rebuilt race engines and additional modifications gleaned from testing data. 4 Corvettes arrived for preparation at Le Mans in early June, where they were assigned the numbers they would wear for the grueling 24-hour race. Cunningham number 1, then number 3535, which is this car that's being auctioned off, number 2, number 3, and Camerati Racing Team number 4. Interestingly, chassis 3535's Le Mans registration papers dated May 25th showed Duntov listed as a co-driver for the race with Cunningham. When Ed Cole found out, he came to a private agreement with Cunningham, which conditioned GM's continued unofficial support for the Le Mans effort, as well as Duntov's trip to France, on Cunningham promising he would not allow Duntov behind the wheel for the race. Ed Cole knew Duntov was far too valuable of an asset to potentially lose in the dangerous 24-hour race, and Duntov had already raced at Le Mans 4 times between 1952 and 1955, supposedly on GM's dime. While Duntov is documented as having been behind the wheel of a Corvette during several testing sessions, Cunningham kept his promise, and Duntov was replaced by Bill Kimberly, accomplished racer in his own right. Cunningham's decision supposedly cost him his friendship with Duntov for 14 years. That's some sour grapes. Car number 1 began the race with Cunningham behind the wheel, and together with the other 2 Cunningham Corvettes, they appeared competitive against the European GT 5.0 field during the race's opening hours. Around 6 p.m., however, it started raining heavily, forcing many to pit and make adjustments. It was during this time that number 1 would make its first driver change. All fueled up with new tires, and with fresh driver Bill Kimberly behind the wheel, number 1 left the pits. Kimberly piloted the car swiftly through Dunlop, pushing the car to its limits around the Mousseline Straight. Kimberly was nearing the completion of his first lap when, just after passing over the top of the hill after Arnage, the car was met by a wall of rain. As Kimberly lifted off the power, he lost control of car number 1, spun, flipped twice, and caught fire. Luckily for Kimberly, the car landed right side up and he emerged from the crash unscathed. The fire melted the car's engine ignition wires, causing 3535's retirement after just 32 laps. Shortly thereafter, a similar event forced the number 2 car, driven by Thompson, off the track at the same corner, damaging the front and rear bodywork. Though number 2 limped back to the pits and was repaired, a later engine failure during lap 207 forced another retirement for the Cunningham effort. The number 3 Corvette, piloted by Bob Grossman and John Fitch, proved to be the most resilient of the Cunningham entries, winning the GT 5.0 class and finishing 8th overall. After Le Mans, all 3 Cunningham Corvettes were brought back stateside, and Momo returned the engines to Frank Burrell at GM. The 3 chassis were then passed along to Cunningham ally Bill Frick of Rockville Center, New York, who proceeded to sell the cars in Florida. Unlike its brethren, chassis 3535 was immediately sold by Frick to another Cunningham friend, SCCA racer Marshall Perry Bosworth Jr. of Delray Beach, Florida. Boswell received the car as raced, save for the engine and hardtop. Even the Le Mans roundel was still intact. Historic imagery provided by the Boswell family presents illustrations of the chassis transformation from a beat-up motorless race car to an extravagant streamlined roadster. The front end was replaced with the single headlight fenders of an earlier style, intersected by a unique Zagato-esque grille of Boswell's design. The hood received a small central scoop. The rear end remained largely intact, but the stock design's distinctive side strakes were filled in. Finally, Boswell clad the whole chassis with black paint and perched it on chrome turbine wheels shod in wide white-wall tires. At some point around 1966, Boswell sold the now-disguised ex-Le Mans racer. According to historical research on file, the car passed through several local owners, one of whom painted the car green and then yellow, until arriving under the care of Jerry Moore in 1971. Moore sold the car in 1974 to Dan Mathis, and soon afterwards the car disappeared from the public eye. It would remain out of sight for the next 37 years. In 1993, well before chassis 3535 resurfaced, noted Corvette restorer Kevin McKay, who we will hear from shortly, was able to obtain chassis numbers for all three Cunningham Corvettes that raced at the 1960 24-hour Le Mans via contacts in France. It's a fascinating story as to how he did that. Be sure to stay tuned to hear it. This information would eventually prove crucial in confirming the identities of all three of the Cunningham cars, including this storied Corvette. In early 2011, a Tampa classified appeared online for a pre-production Zagato-bodied Pontiac prototype with a low asking price that reflected its still obscured history. The seller, Rick Carr, was clearing out the estate of his recently deceased father, the Honorary Richard W. Carr Sr., and uncovered the neglected chassis in a corner of his father's warehouse. The car's status as one of the Cunningham Le Mans entries was unknown to Carr until he began researching the chassis number. This research eventually led him to Cunningham historian Larry Berman, who was able to confirm that he was in possession of a very special car, the number 1 Cunningham Le Mans entry. Presented today in as-found condition, this unique chassis still presents conclusive evidence of its racing history, despite Boswell's best efforts to completely transform its appearance. Inside the wheel wells, bespoke intake ducting is aimed at the car's original race spec drum brakes and continues into the cabin footwell. An additional wiring harness still hangs from where it would have powered the driver's side roundel light at Le Mans. The oversized fuel tank remains behind the cabin, and the underbody shows evidence of mounting points for additional components such as oil coolers, as well as safety straps and cutouts for the side exit race exhaust that once serenaded the French crowd of nearly 250,000. Ahead of the windshield sits a mounting hole for the central windshield wiper used at Le Mans, a key feature that helped enable the initial identification of this chassis, while a patch on the rear deck lid clearly shows where the quick-fill fuel cap assembly previously emerged. Inside the engine bay now sits a 350 cubic inch Chevrolet V8 from the 1970 model year. A mounting plate for the Duntov specified remote starter is still tacked to the firewall, however. Telling traces of the car's original Le Mans livery has been preserved under the subsequent layers of paint, while the central console, still displaying its original blue finish, is partially retained. With Cunningham's number 2 and number 3 Corvettes having been restored to their 1960 Le Mans glory, this car, chassis 3535, is fully deserving of a similar treatment. It is surely among the most important Corvettes ever offered to the public, a testament to Briggs Cunningham's dogged efforts to prove Americans' mettle on the global motorsport stage. This chassis played as an undeniable role in the push that finally brought him victory at Le Mans in 1960, a victory that helped cement the Corvette's reputation as America's sports car. What a great recap, and now it is time to hear from the expert. Okay, you've just gotten an overview of the Cunningham Corvettes that will be available at RM Sotheby's Amelia sale. Now let's hear from the Corvette expert who knows more about these cars than anyone else. I'd like to welcome Kevin McKay, who is the founder of Corvette Repair Incorporated out of Valley Stream, New York. Kevin, how you doing, buddy?
Greg, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time today. And just as a brief overview of your business, you mostly work on really high-end, rare, special Corvettes, such as the L88, the Grand Sports, some of the prototype cars, some of the cutaway cars. If you would, for our listeners, just kind of give an overview of your business up there in New York.
Okay, I mean, we're known for our restoration work, Greg, but we do regular repair as well. We specialize from C1, C2, and C3 only. That's what we know quite well. But you're right, we do have a reputation on some very rare, significant cars, but we're a regular service shop for Corvettes only. Once in a while, we'll get a specialty car, and we had two real special Penske Camaros come in, serial number 1 and first 67, and the serial number 1 first 68 Trans Am Camaros. But usually 99.9% of the time it's just strictly Corvettes from C1 to C3. I was 23 years old. I got my first Corvette. When I was 21, it was the anniversary of the Corvette, 1978. And I remember preparing that car for delivery to a gentleman. There was a lot of hype on that, and that car I think retailed for like $14,000, and they were going as much as 30 to 50,000 a piece at the time back in '78, which is just unheard of money. I've always enjoyed them, and I was quite familiar with those cars at the time. Worked for a couple of dealerships. I started my business, I think in March of '85, and I've been doing it ever since. I had a '65 Corvette Coupe, and I did probably 85% of the work myself. And the only thing I could not do was do body work and paint. So I had somebody paint the car for $600.
Wow.
And put it all back together again. And I started going to some local shows, and I did quite well. And then I heard about NCRS. I became a member there back in the early 80s, and heard about Bloomington, and got a hold of a gentleman named David Burrows, who was one of my mentors, who wrote a book about art of restoration on a 65 396 convertible. I hunted him down and called him up, and he couldn't be any nicer to me. I'm a nobody in the hobby, and I just wanted to learn.
Right.
And once a month for about maybe 6 months, I would ask him all these questions about what finishes on certain parts and head markings and stuff like that. And he said to me, he says, well, Kevin, he goes, I know you haven't been to too many places, he says, but, Bloomington is a real high-end show, and, maybe the first time out, you might not even get an award, or you might get a bronze or a silver. And I said, well, David, that's why I'm talking to you, because I ain't going unless I get a gold.
Right.
And I want you to I want you to guide me through it. Well, it's not going to be easy. But he was very patient with me, and he was just, I learned a tremendous amount of information from him, and we spoke, maybe it was once a month for about an hour. I took all my notes. I bought an old flatbed truck, a 62 Chevy flatbed truck. I drove it 18-hour drive from New York to Bloomington, Illinois by myself, and I was nervous, as you can imagine, in your 20s. I had the car judged. The judges were very professional, and I was like, wow, this is, I'm really impressed with this. They all came out with matching uniforms, hats, and shirts, and jackets, and so on. And it turned out I'm looking at all the cars, because I'm doing like a comparison, my car versus some of the other cars in my group, which
Sure.
I think was a 10-car limit. And I said, man, my car's pretty good. I'm looking at some of the other cars, and I don't want to say anything to anybody, because I didn't know anybody. And I said, wow, I think I'm going to do okay here. And it turned out, after the procedure was all over, it was the end of the day, and I was waiting for if I'm going to get a bronze or a silver or a gold. I went up to one of the judges and said, by the way, I said, I maybe you probably don't know, but how'd you think I did? I said, no doubt you had the nicest car there in the group.
Wow.
I said, really? I said, wow. So I got the gold. I was so excited. I haven't met Mr. Burrows yet. I knew what he looked like, because there's enough photographs of him in his book. And I finally saw him, and I ran over to him. I go, Mr. Burrows, Mr. Burrows. He goes, oh, you must be Kevin McKay. I said, I am, in the flesh. I'm here. Well, how'd you do? I said, I told you I'd get the gold. I said, because of your guidance. If it wasn't for you, I never would have came, and you encouraged me, and I did my homework, and I said, yeah, I heard your car is quite spectacular. I said, well, now I want to become a judge.
Wow.
Really? Well, I have to groom you. So once a month for an hour at a time. He would groom me for 12 months. And believe it or not, I've been judging there. This is my 35th year judging there in a row.
Oh, my goodness. Wow, that's amazing.
I'm still doing it. I started in my 20s, and I'm in my 60s. Now I'm on Medicare.
That's awesome. So your first car at Bloomington Gold received a gold, right?
Yeah, a high-scoring car in its class at the time. And I was very proud of that. And I had a reporter come up to me, and they did a book on Bloomington Gold cars. I did a nice feature of my car at the time. And believe it or not, the background was the Twin Towers, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
The book, which is really something. But who knew back then?
Do you still have that car or know where that car is?
Yeah, the car's still in Long Island. It's owned by another client of mine, believe it or not. But what really happened was before I sold it, I took it to a show called the Mountain Connor Chevrolet Show, and I met a gentleman named a guy named Ed Mueller, who at the time, in the early 80s, was probably the number one Corvette collector. And just some of the cars that he owned one of the original Grand Sport number 2.
Wow.
He owned the factory ZL1 Corvette, one of only two built. That was the yellow one. That's owned by a gentleman named Roger Jeske down in Florida. He owned not one but two factory 67 L88s. He owned the only mid-year Corvette that raced at Le Mans, the number 9 car. That's owned by another collector in Ohio. And he owned a black side pipe L88 car with 11,000 original miles.
Wow.
And he owned probably another half a dozen C3 L88s. And I was at a show called the Malcolm Connor Chevrolet Show in Paramus, New Jersey, back in the early 80s. And I brought my 65 Corvette there to show it. And I was able to get my car. I got there really early. I was able to put my car in the showroom, overlooking the Malcolm Connor fluorescent sign. And my car was being judged. And I didn't know a soul. And this gentleman came up to me, and he says, he goes, "This is your car." I said, "Yes, it is. Would you mind? I'd like to judge your car." Me and a couple of guys are going to judge cars. So they're judging my cars. And he said, "Well, what restoration shop did this car?" I said, "Well, I did most of the work myself, except for the body work and paint. But I did everything else myself." And he says, "Well, if you ever get a shop, call me."
Right.
And he gave me his business card, and on the business card it said Ed Mueller. And I read about him in all the magazines. I said, "Oh, you're Mr. Mueller." I said, "I read some wonderful things about you. You got a hell of a collection of cars." He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "But boy, I'm very impressed with your work, Kevin. If you ever have a shop, let me know." Well, guess what? My last job after I got fired from that, I started my business. And guess who I called first?
Yeah, that's right.
And the first car he gave me to work on was a factory 69 ZL1 coupe, one of only two built.
Wow.
That's how it started off. And what happened was, he gave me his 67 L88, or he gave me his 67 L8 Le Mans car, or he gave me one of his C3 L8s, and then he gave me some other cars. And for the first 17 years in business, we became best of friends, and he was my best customer. And that really set the trend in the Corvette community that this guy from New York is doing all this Mr. Mueller's work.
Right.
And Ed was a showman, and we showed the cars, and word got out about some of the special cars that we did, and people started looking at the cars, and they were, I guess, impressed with the work. And one thing led to another, and I grew and found a piece of property and bought a building. But what happened was that when I tried to buy the building, or tried to buy the piece of property to have a building built, I had zero credit. The only thing I had was a Macy's credit card. So the guy that had the building for sale, who was one of my customers in my little rented shop, I used to rent, and he said, "Well, look, I got this piece of property. I think we can build you a building here, and you can, it'd be a dream come true." Because I was in this little one-bay shop. So he goes, "Well, you have to get a loan." So I went down to my local bank, and the bank goes, "You have any credit?" I said, "Well, I have a Macy's card." "Well, I'm sorry, sir, but I ain't got to cut it. I need more than that to loan you money to buy this property and then have a building built. I'm sorry, but we can't. You're too much of a risk because you have no credit." I said, "In my 20s." So I went back to the owner of the property, my customer, and he said, "Look, Kevin, I may be out of my mind, but I'm going to hold the mortgage for you."
Wow.
And guess what? It never was late on my payments, and I paid off in 15 years, and I'm still in the building today.
Wow.
So
that's amazing. That's a heck of a career journey you have there. I mean, to, like you said, to not have a college degree, but then to learn everything that you needed to learn by hands-on, reaching out to who you needed to reach out to, make the right connections, do the work, and have the results. That's an amazing way to start the business, and it sounds like you really got off to a great start just because of the high standard you had for your cars, right?
Well, I mean, I was obsessed with it. I read every Corvette book I could think of, learned a lot about the history, and believe me, I made a lot of mistakes early on because sometimes you learn from your mistakes. I learned self-taught pretty much. I mean, I was a line mechanic at Chevrolet for years, and I knew the theory behind it, but when it came to restoration, I just learned from going to shows and taking a lot of pictures of other people's work and learning from them and asking a lot of questions, and that's how you get a lot of knowledge. Like I said, I fell off my feet quite a few times over the years, but in the end, it really paid off, and I met some wonderful people. Because what really makes this hobby other people, they really do. It's been a great journey for me, and I'm gonna, as long as I got my health, I'm gonna continue on. And we have two factory 57 Sebring cars we're working on right now, which is unbelievable. So we've been very blessed. I've been very blessed, but like I said before, you always practice what you preach. If you say something, you have to back it up.
Right.
If you're gonna say something, make a statement, back it up, and that's what we've always done.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really great. And I do want to move on to the Cunningham Corvettes. But before I do, I did want to find out, I mean, you're working on some crazy rare stuff. I mean, the prototype Corvettes, the rear engine cars, the cutaways. Are most of those, are all of those from private collections, or are you doing some work for like the Corvette Museum?
I support the National Corvette Museum. I think it's just a wonderful, spectacular place. If you have never been there, I would highly recommend it. We have 3 cars there right now that we're involved with that are there on display. I love what I do, and it's not a job to me. It's more of a hobby, and I don't call myself an expert because I learn every single day, and I'm open-minded. I'm far from a know-it-all, and sometimes I have to appear in court, and people hire me for my time as supposedly an expert, and I said, no, I'm just an enthusiast because I'm always learning.
Right.
Because I can't know from 1953 to present Corvettes. There's no way I know everything by memory. So I don't consider myself an expert. I just consider myself just a hobbyist or an enthusiast.
Right.
But
right.
Sometimes
Yeah.
I know better than others. But like I said, it's always a learning process for me. And I think if you have that kind of attitude, you're constantly learning.
Sure. Yeah, that's for sure, especially with some of the cars you've restored. I imagine just finding out how they're supposed to be properly restored was a big learning curve on a lot of these cars because some of them don't have another one that you could reference, right?
Yeah, well, like we did work on the Surf 2. That was a real one of one, and the XP819 car, and finding the 003, the world's oldest production Corvette in existence, finding that on eBay, and like as the ZL1 and the 67 LA cars, and some of the cars that went to either Le Mans, Sebring, or Daytona. We've been very fortunate, but see, I didn't get married until I was 50 because I just worked too much. That was my problem. I worked 6-7 days a week. I probably would have been a lousy husband. I probably would have been a lousy father if I had children.
Right.
And my passion at the time was just, going to shows. I met a lot of nice people along the way. A lot of them became, very close to me. And like I said, I'm still going to continue on.
Yeah. No, that's really great. Well, moving on to the Cunningham Corvettes, from what I've read and what I understand is you were key in not only discovering, what the VIN numbers were to these cars, but actually digging up and restoring some of these cars. Could you give our listeners kind of an overview of your involvement with the Cunningham cars?
Well, Ed Mueller, who was the number one Corvette collector at the time, had a Corvette that raced at Le Mans in 1967. It was a factory LA car that came out of a place called Dana Chevrolet in Southgate, California. And Dick Ulstrand, most people knew who he was, Mr. Corvette himself, was the high-performance manager for Dana Chevrolet, and has been racing since the 50s. They had an opportunity to go to Le Mans, and they ordered a special car at the dealership. And it came in, and it was leading at the race. It was leading its class for 13 hours until a wrist pin went on it. And but what happened was I was going through the scrapbook that Mr. Mueller had, and in there it had all these inspection sheets with a serial number on it. And I looked at it. I said, "Where the hell did you get this from?" He goes, "Well, I heard that that Le Mans has some really unbelievable records. I wrote to them. Probably about 3 or 4 months later, I got all those documents from Le Mans." I said, "Well, I know that 1960 was the first year for Corvettes that entered Le Mans. Do you think they would have those records that far back?" He says, "Well, what do you got to lose? Write to them." So I wrote to them. 6 months later, I got nothing in the mail, nothing. And then one time I had dinner with Ed, and I said, "Ed, I don't get it. Maybe they don't have any records." "Well, how'd you do it?" I said, I found out, the address for Le Mans. I wrote to them. "Well, did you write it in French or did you write it in English?" I said, "I don't know French. I wrote it in English." He goes, "You idiot, you got to write it in French." I said, "Well, you didn't tell me that." "Well, you didn't ask." I said, "What else you got to do?" I said, "Well, tell me now." He goes, "I found out that you have to send a bouquet of flowers in good gesture." I said, "Really?" So I had a customer, and that was French. And then I even went to a French school. I rewrote the letter in French, same address. And about 3 months later, I get a fax copy of all the Corvettes in 1960 that raced at Le Mans with the serial numbers.
Wow.
So I had the Holy Grail in my hand, and I think that was like 1993, I believe that was. I couldn't believe it. At the time, one has been found. The number 2 car has been found by a guy named Michael Pillsbury, and the number 1 car and the number 3 car were still unknown. So I went after those cars, and I had a couple of clients that are either work for the government or they're law enforcement people. So I asked them if they could do me a favor, and they ran the VIN, and I got 3 hits actually. I got one hit that Michael Pillsbury owned the number 2 car in California, which I knew he knew what he had, so no sense going after that car.
Right.
And then the number one car was last titled in '74 by a guy named Jerry Elmore in Tampa, Florida, on Delaware Street. Don't forget it. And then the third car, which is the class winner car, was a pilot named James Walsh in St. Louis. So I said, well, let me see if I get any more hits. So I did some more research, and I find out that James Walsh was still living in St. Louis, and I called him, and he said he still had the car. Didn't know what it was. It was just converted back to a street car. And it took 7 years to get the car from him.
Wow.
But in the interim, at the time, Bob Grossman, the original driver, and John Fitch were still alive. So I got friendly with both those guys and let them know that I know where their car was. That's the one with the dry ice on top of on the fuel injection plenum when one of the pit crew guys forgot to put the radiator cap back on the radiator and lost all the fluid. And by the rules, you can't put any more fluid in the car unless you go 25 laps. So they had to put dry ice to keep the engine cool.
Wow.
So what happened was me and Chip Miller, who's Lance's father, is the one of the owners of Carlisle Events. We were very, very close. We drove together Bloomington for many years. We became real best of friends at the time. And I told him that I'm going after this car. And he said, Kevin, my all-time favorite car in the whole wide world is that car. He goes, I graduated high school in 1960. When I first saw Mike Pillsbury's car in Monterey, California in '87, I almost fainted. The car is just beautiful. And I said, I tell you, I would love to own that car. I said, Chip, we're best of friends. The next best thing owning him is having your friends own him.
Right. I
said, there's other cars I'm going after. There's another car that I really want. It's called a Penske Corvette. I said, I'll tell you what I'll do here. If I get that car, you're going to get it for wherever I pay for it. And he said, well, in return, Kevin, you're getting the restoration because you're the only guy that can do it right, you and your team. I said, okay, we got a deal. We shook hands, and we talked about that car every single day for years. And finally, I would send this guy a Christmas card, Corvette hat, Corvette book, Corvette magazine, and I kept in touch with Mr. Walsh and his wife. And then I would call him during the holidays, see how he was doing, him and his family. And I said, look, I know you take good care of my car. I'm going to get that car from you. He goes, yeah, but right now I'm still enjoying it. It's not for sale. 7 years finally. And Chip told me, if that car ever comes up for sale, I don't care what time it is, day or night, you promise you'll call me. I said, not a problem. So I get home one night. It was a Sunday night, and I was out with some friends. It was about 1 a.m, and I played my message machine and said, it's Mr. Walsh. If you want the car, it's yours.
Wow.
I was so excited. What I did was I contacted Chip at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. The phone rings twice, and I hear, you got me the car. I didn't know it was me. Because what other idiot would call me up at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday?
Really great that he knew exactly who it was calling him at that time and why. And I just love the persistence and the fact that you had to write back in French, and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, we just went on and on and on.
How many years was it from the time that you first made your first effort in writing that letter to the time that your client got that car?
Oh, it was 7 years. It was 93, and we got the car, I think, in 2000, 2001. Yeah, so
okay.
About 7 years, yeah. That's how much we just kept on it because the guy didn't want to sell it, but we knew where it was, and I was afraid that there'd be other people, behind me tracking it down, and I could feel it. And I said, the stars were aligned properly, and I was at the right time, right place. But you see, what I did was I didn't push anybody. I asked them if they gave me their word that when you're ready to sell it, I'm your buyer.
Right.
And they kept their word, and the rest is history. But to get back on the other Cunningham car, the number one car, that car took me 19 years to find, and I didn't find the car. If it wasn't for Chip, I never would have got that car. And I'm going to tell you why. Because once we got the 3 car for Chip goes, we got to get you the 1 car. You got to get the 1 car. You and me are best of friends. I'm going to help you get that 1 car. I'm going to help you. So what I did was when we were restoring the number 3 car, our team, I made duplicates of everything. I made the roll bar. I made the hood louvers. We made the headlight covers. And, we just made duplicates of everything. Because maybe one day we would find that particular car. So Chip had a rare blood disease, and he died in March of 2004. And Chip, at the time, was the only guy that I was aware of that I shared the VIN number of the number 1 car, which is VIN number 3535, last 4 digits. Because I said, Chip, when you look at any 60 Corvette, asked the guy to open up the hood, and let's just keep checking VIN numbers, and that's what we did. We looked at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of 60 Corvettes, because maybe by chance the car was converted back to a street car too, just like the number 3 Chip had. So when Chip got sick, he took the VIN number and he shared it with a guy named Larry Berman, who runs the Cunningham website. Anyone that's Cunningham related, Larry's just a wonderful individual. At the time, I didn't know who he was. I didn't even knew about the website, to be honest with you. I wasn't a big computer guy back then. So Chip shared the VIN number before he passed away to Larry. Larry puts it up on his website. I had no knowledge of that. So over the years, people get real savvy, and these cars get quite collectible, quite rare, quite expensive. This gentleman named Rick Carr, his father passed away, had this old, beat-up basket case Corvette. Couldn't figure out the VIN on the car. He says, look, maybe we can pull the body up on one side and see if we get the VIN number off the car. So he gets the VIN number off the car. He finds out it's a 60 Corvette, and the last 4 digits says 3535.
Wow.
I think his a cousin or nephew Google searched it and went back on Larry Berman's website. That's the missing number 1 Briggs Cunningham Le Mans Corvette. Larry gets a hold of Lance Miller. Lance Miller goes, "You're kidding me." He goes, "Yes, this guy called me up out of nowhere. He took the VIN off the chassis and ran it, and came up at my website, and I remember Chip telling me, Kevin will probably kill me, but I'm dying anyway. But here's the VIN number of the car, and maybe by chance, maybe the car will find him. It'll find you." So Larry remembered the story, told Lance about it. Lance goes, "Let me talk to my mom about that." And his mom, Judy Miller, said yes. Chip promised Kevin if he ever found that car, he would get the car because he got the 3 car for our family. So Lance calls me up. He goes, "You're not going to believe this, but because of my dad, the car's in Florida." And me and Lance are very, very close. I'm as close as Lance I was with his father, Chip. And I said to him, something, Lance? I think you're full of it. Because, when you're friends, you kid around all the time, right? We played games with each other. And at the time, I was just getting inducted into the Great Hall of Bloomington Gold at the time, back in 2012 this was. And I said, "Look, Lance, I got so much on my mind right now. I'm running late. I got to be there for the induction." I said, "No, Kevin, this ain't a joke. I'm telling you, this is a guy down in Florida, in St. Petersburg, Florida, that claims he has VIN number 3535. He says, I'm going to get the pictures in a couple of days."
Wow.
So after the induction, I go back home to New York. He calls me and goes, "Hey, did you check your email yet?" I said, "No." He goes, "I got the photographs of that car down in Florida. You better take a look at it. It is a wreck. It's a disaster, the car." So I opened up the email, opened up the attachment, and within 3 seconds, I knew it was the car.
Right.
Called Lance. I said, "Lance, it's the car." "Oh, come on, Kevin. I know you're good, but how good can you be?" I go, "Listen to me. You see that hole in the center of the body? That's the wiper hole. That's only on the Cunningham cars. They took the outside wiper pivot that's on the passenger side. They moved it to the center. And they only did that on the Cunningham cars because we worked on the number 3 car."
Right.
I remember that like it was yesterday. I go, "The hole's still there. It's the car." And then I saw the starter bracket that was still bolted to the firewall. It was still there. It's only on the Cunningham cars. I said, "It's the car." And the VIN tag. So what happened was the VIN tag was on the steering column. On early 1960, it used to be on the doorpost on the driver's side. And then they moved it later on the steering column. And when the guy looked at the doorpost, he didn't see a VIN tag on it because at the time the car was so heavily customized. It had just 2 headlights, one on each side. Whereas, from 1953 to 1957, it was only a double headlight, right? A single headlight on each side, 2 headlights. And then in 1958, there was 4 headlights, right? 2 high beams, 2 low beams, from 58 to 62. So everybody thought it was either a 53 to 57 Corvette. So everybody kept looking at the door jamb, not knowing that the VIN tag was on the steering column. But there was so much dirt and undercoating and caked up, nobody could see the VIN on the car. The VIN tag was there the whole time.
I found some online references that shows how, the differences or how you were able to do that from the fresh air intake on the driver's side to the exhaust hanger straps, all the stuff that you're talking about that only, I hate to say it, but an expert like yourself would know just by digging into that other car, knowing that the drill hole bolts, were different for the fuel pump, all that kind of stuff that really verifies that that's the real deal, the remote starter, all sorts of cool stuff like that. So that must have been a really exciting time that you were reviewing those pictures, right?
Well, yeah, because I have literally hundreds and hundreds of photographs of the number 3 car during the restoration, before, during, and after. And so I was looking at the pictures, but then again, I had a car here.
Right.
And when we finally purchased the number 1 car, we had them side by side. and I went from left to right, and I mean, there was the same group of people that worked on all three cars. So then I looked at, like you said, I looked at the exhaust hanger brackets, and one strap was still there, the hose was still mounted there. I looked at the fuel pump holes. I looked at the starter, like you said, the starter bracket. I had the big tank in the back, which they only made 10 big tank cars in 1960. That was the first year for big tank, was 1960. Only made 10 of them, and out of that, 4 went to Le Mans. It just was. The more I kept looking, and then, of course, the wiper hole, which we talked about before, and then I looked underneath the dash. I see the blue. I think the car was originally a white car with a blue interior, and it was ordered out of Don Allen Chevrolet right here in New York City. They had the 3 cars here. So it was mind-boggling. Just looking at this stuff. I said, son of a gun, it is what it is. And then we debuted the car at Carlisle. What better place to debut it? At a private party in front of 250 people. We had all the press there, and we had a smoke machine, and we had the car in the garage, and we made the music, the Odyssey music, and then we opened the garage door, and the smoke clears, and people were blown away. But it's rough, but it's real.
Right.
And that's all that matters.
So for our listeners, you can go to rmsotheby's.com and take a look at the pictures. It's maroon. And if you want to see what it should look like, go to Kevin's website, CorvetteRepair.com, and click on About. And you have a great picture of the number 3 car finished and looking gorgeous there. So it's kind of a before and after shot of those 2 cars, right?
Exactly. It's not as bad as people think because, the only left is the VIN tag. That's not true. It has the original frame. That's absolutely beautiful, that frame. Remember, the car only raced 2 races. It raced the Sebring in 1960. The engine blew. And then it went to Le Mans, and it crashed after 32 laps and flipped over and caught fire. But see, the fire wasn't that severe because when you're at a racetrack, what's there? Besides spectators, there's an emergency crew, and there's a fire truck. So if there's a crash, that emergency crew with the fire trucks are on there within seconds. So they put that thing out. As a matter of fact, that car flipped over in the pouring rain. So it was on fire, but the fire was diminished pretty quickly. Between the emergency crew and the fire trucks and the rain, there was damage, but the car's got the original birdcage, including the original floor, including the original firewall. It's got the original VIN tag. It's got the original chassis. It's got the original big tank. I mean, it's got the original doors on the car because we have photographs of it back in April 1962 when a guy named Perry Balwell was a customizer who bought it from Cunningham and customized the car and put the signal headlights on each side on it. So we have the complete chain of ownership on that car besides.
Right.
So that car was concrete, bulletproof. It's the car plus the documentation from Le Mans.
Right.
So it's basically a no-brainer. And why people would knock the car, it's such a piece of history, and we are going to put that car back together. Hopefully, we'll have the opportunity to put it back together again because it's going to sell. It can sell for $1, or it can sell for over $1 million.
I really hope that when the hammer falls, the next day you're getting that phone call saying, we need to ship it up there as soon as possible because I'm sure it's a couple-year project to get it done.
Yeah, it will be. It will be a couple-year project for sure, but we're ready to go on it. We have the experience, we have the knowledge, and we have a lot of the parts that were hand fabricated that we make duplicates of. So we're pretty excited about it. I just hope it goes to a great home. I've got a lot of calls on that thing already. I got a lot of people that appear to be interested, but see, no one's telling you, how bad they want it because nobody wants to be overbid or whatever, even though it's no reserve. But it's going to be very interesting who comes out of the closet to try to buy that car.
Yeah, I'd love to know where it goes in the future. I do want to know, is the speedometer original? It says Fascio Vega Jaeger speedometer. Is that original to the car?
Absolutely not. That's just an aftermarket thing they put on later on.
Okay.
The dash was all heavily modified. The center console part of it, a piece of it, the original center console where the radio would normally be, is still there. It's broken apart pretty badly, but it's there.
Right.
I mean, I think I found at least 24 forensic evidence on there about telltale signs that there's no question. It even still had the original wiring harness for the light on the right side rear quarter panel. It still had the breather tube for the fresh air, like you said, coming in from the outside into the driver's side. I mean, it's just amazing what that car still had on it. Because I think the car was parked from 1976 till 2012. Nothing was really done with the car. The Judge car, who passed away, Bought that car for $200 in '76. Bought off a
Wow.
used car lot, a Sunoco gas station used car lot for $200. It was too ugly, the car. Nobody wanted it.
That's the way to find them so you can afford them.
Eventually, we want to have all three together. It's going to be 65 years in the making. Think about it. 1960. I know when we're going to debut it. I'd like to wait 65 years. So what's that going to be? It's going to be 2025.
25,
right?
yeah.
Maybe have all three cars back at Le Mans.
Wow, that would be incredible. That's a great target date.
Wouldn't that be great? I mean, you got to think of this, Greg. The cars representing the United States. It's like going to the Olympics. The most prestigious race in the world is the 24 Hours of Le Mans, bar none. Bar none.
Yeah.
That's like the grand poobah of racing. So having that car there, and that was the first car on the starting grid, and the first guy that drove that car was Briggs Cunningham. Now, I went to Zora Duntov's home after he passed away. I was invited to go there with a guy named Jerry Burton that did the book on Zora Duntov. And I was able to get a handwritten letter that Briggs Cunningham wrote to Duntov when he retired in 1974. And I have a copy of that letter, which is an amazing thing. It talks about the number one car because Duntov was supposed to drive that car with Cunningham at the race.
Right.
But Ed Cole said, look, if Duntov goes over there and races that car, we end our relationship. I'll let Duntov go on one condition. Promise me you're not going to let him drive that car because he'll probably kill himself.
Right.
But you deal with the most professional, most talented racers, and, they're out for blood. So don't let him go over there and assist you, but I don't want him behind the seat of that car. So Cunningham gave him his word. I will not let Duntov drive that car. So he got a young guy named Bill Kimberly to drive that car, and that's the guy that flipped it over in the pouring rain. So
Right.
it's just a great, great story of the whole thing.
Yeah, it really is, yeah. So as this podcast posts, it's posting on a Thursday. Be sure to tune in to the Orange Sotheby's auction. Check it out online on the 22nd. Check it out online and see what happens to that Corvette. So one thing I like to do at the end here, Kevin, is to play a little game I think I gave you a heads up on. If I didn't, I apologize. But it's called Keep Cash and Crush. So I'm going to give you 3 cars. I'm not giving you L88s, Grand Sports, or prototypes or anything super crazy. But I'll give you 3 cars, and you have to tell me which one you want to keep forever, which one you're going to cash in, and then which one you're unfortunately going to send to the crusher. So each car, you have to tell me, are you going to keep it, are you going to cash it, or are you going to crush it? Are you ready?
Yep.
All right. So I wanted to find out your perspective on more of the common Corvettes, but still special Corvettes. So I'm going to give you 3 Corvettes. The first one is a 1963 split window with the 365 horsepower engine, okay?
Okay, listening.
Just call them all, grade 2 cars, desirable, not over the top. The second one is a 67 427 435 horsepower convertible. And then the third one is a 69 L89 convertible. So we have an L89, 69, a 67 435 horsepower convertible, and then the 63 split window 365 horse. So which one would you keep forever, which one would you cash in, and which one would you crush and why?
Oh boy, and they're all great cars.
Yes.
Now you said the 69 is a convertible?
Yes.
It is, okay. Wow. Boy, that's a toughie. I'm a big block guy, so it would probably be, if it's do I have a choice of colors?
Yes. You have choice of colors.
Okay. All right, then I'll keep the 67. I would make it a black car with blue interior, 435 Roadster. That's a car I would keep.
Wow.
Okay. That's a pretty rare piece. Boy, God, I love the split window, and I love the L89. Boy, that's a toughie. Okay, one I have to sell, the other one I have to crush, right?
Yep, and this is where I do not edit out the silence.
Okay. I felt sell the split window, and I have to crush the L89 car. Believe it or not. That's a toughie because I love them all. Why don't you give me like a C4 or something? That's no brand. No, they're all great cars. You're damn if you do, you're damn if you know. There's no winners here with that.
That's right.
They're
That's
all
right.
spectacular cars, and I would, it's funny because I'm looking at how about a 69 L89 automatic that's black with blue interior. I've got the paperwork on that car. I'm trying to find the car. And as you know, we did a book called The Corvette Hunter, and I'm still looking. I just love the hunt and the chase, and of course, the end result to find is always cool.
Well, that's a great point. So you do have a book called The Corvette Hunter, and they can go where to find that?
Well, they go right on my website, CorvetteRepair.com, and I'll give you an autographed copy. The book is $25, show special. They're out of print. I still got some books left, and they sold out. About a year and a half, they sold out.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really great. And for our listeners, I know quite a few have been sending me some barn find pictures. No Corvettes yet, but if you have a Corvette you would like to share with Kevin, be sure to send it to me at gstanley@rmsothebys.com, and we'll make sure he gets it. You've sent me some really cool stuff, so keep doing it. And we'll see if we can find that L89 black with blue interior. Is that right? Automatic?
Automatic coupe. Yep, 69. I got the paperwork on it. I'm just trying to find the car.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time tonight, Kevin.
Greg, a pleasure, and thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Collector Car Podcast. Don't forget to give us a nice rating on iTunes, and be sure to follow us on Instagram and everywhere else at the Collector Car Podcast.